So seemingly unrelated questions for the Take 5 for 8.10. If you remember, during World War I, President Woodrow Wilson created the 14 points. These were his intent for the end of World War I, his goals for reestablishing peace, and then once the war is over at the Treaty of Versailles, Britain and France are more concerned with punishing Germany, with getting back debt for the war, or possibly uh, just placing blame. So when the League of Nations is created, President Wilson decides that America will not join because of the vindictive nature of the Treaty of Versailles. He sees that it really was more hurtful than helpful. And during the 1920s, for the most part, America was very neutral. They sort of retreat from the bulk of international relations because they attempted to help. They tried to assist Europe's war and then ignored all following suggestions. Now, there was a little bit of interaction with Europe, especially with the Dawes Plan, because America wants to help Germany so that America can eventually get its money back. Then we've got Japan. We haven't checked in with Japan for a while. If you remember, in 1854, Commodore Matthew Perry from the U.S. Navy sails into Tokyo, and this is what will start off the Meiji era. The Japanese had the choice: do we try and fight back Western imperialism, or do we cooperate and modernize? And they learn from the example of the Chinese that fighting back against a modern Western power will not go well. So the Meiji era is about modernization, westernization, and within a few decades, Japan has really established itself as a world power, especially in Eastern Asia. We see that with the Russo-Japanese War. And Japan is trying to extend its sphere of influence. So all of this will lead up to our topics for today. The Blitz is a proper noun. It is a very specific event. But we have talked about this word blitz before in relation to blitzkrieg, or lightning war. That was the tactic that Hitler used to invade Poland very swiftly, using tanks and air cover. But here, the Blitz takes place in Great Britain, and it begins, or it's inspired by, the Royal Air Force. Now, with the Battle of Britain, Britain was being attacked by the Luftwaffe. Towards the end of that process, in fall 1940, the Royal Air Force goes on the offensive and begins attacking Germany. And they are choosing very strategic targets, things that have to do with the economy or waging war. So warehouses, storing goods, military-related factories producing planes or uniforms or weapons, transportation hubs. All of these targets are supposed to disable Germany's ability to make war. That is the goal. So Hitler is so upset, and so the Blitz will be in response to the British attack on Germany. The Blitz takes place from fall 1940 to late spring 1941. When Hitler gets upset that not only did his first part of Operation Sea Lion fail and he's not able to invade Britain, but now Germany is being attacked, and he disagrees with pretty much the rest of the military leadership in Germany. The other military leaders say we should continue targeting the similar targets that the British have chosen: military bases, wartime factories, things like that. But Hitler's not entirely sane, and Hitler wants to target completely different groups or people. He wants to use almost terror tactics to convince the British people that this war is a bad idea. He wants to scare the British civilians so much that they will beg their government to surrender. He does this by targeting cities or population centers. So London, Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester, these big cities. And so this is why in the beginning of Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, or even Lord of the Flies, we start seeing lots of children sent out from the cities into the countryside so that they can be a little bit safer. In addition to targeting cities, Hitler also sends the German bombers at night. This is for that added terror to make it as horrific as possible for the British civilians. Now you remember that these planes are flying mostly by sight and calculations, not by GPS. So by doing it at night, it does add terror for the civilians, but it makes it more difficult for the German planes. So what they had to do is there were German spies who had been in England and would set up a radio transmitter where the preferred target was. That radio transmitter would intercept two radio beams or radio waves from the mainland. And when they crossed over the transmitter, the pilots would be able to hear this and would then drop their bombs. The British were working very hard to intercept as many spies as possible, and they were able to figure out this system, and they moved some of those transmitters into unpopulated areas, fields out in the middle of nowhere, that sort of thing. So right now, if you haven't watched it already, take a look at the clip, London Can Take It. This is a propaganda film from October 1940. It was made by an American journalist, and the purpose of it was to convince America to get in the war and help the British. Because if you look at what the Londoners especially had to go through, I mean, this is over 8 months of attacks. The height of it at the very beginning, 54 nights, night after night, 54 nights in a row of being bombed. So take a look at sort of how the British people respond. One of the things that the population has to do is blackouts. You have to purchase or make blackout curtains for your homes if you ever wanted to use a light in the evening. That's to make sure that these cities are as difficult to see from the air as possible. So also street lamps are extinguished, cars can't use their headlamps at night. It does create a little bit of chaos at first, but it's seen as a necessary step in protecting British cities. The video also shows how civilian groups are really important in this effort. The civilians in this case, they are the soldiers. The home front is now the front lines. There are volunteer firefighters, air wardens, people who have a regular job during the day and at night are going to defend their city. The firefighters put out fires to try and make it difficult for the Germans to see more of their targets. We have the air wardens who try and get as many people in their community safely to a shelter. When these bombs start hitting, you don't want to be above ground. You want to get to a safe place, something with very thick walls, usually a basement, or sometimes it could be a public building. And for those that don't have access to those places, or maybe they're out away from their home, they would start using the tube stations. So the London Underground is used for transportation during the day and at night as shelter for civilians. I mean, these people, during the height of the Blitz, when it was going on night after night after night, rather than waiting to be woken up and the chaos of gathering everything, people just start spending the night in the air raid shelter. And it wasn't a pleasant thing. I'm sure plenty of people were complaining or unhappy, but it was seen as a necessary part of survival. And this goes on for months and months. And that's why it was so important, so essential, that there were strong leaders like Winston Churchill, like King George VI. So even Churchill had to have protection. These are his, what are known as the Cabinet War Rooms. It is a bunker beneath the Ministry of Defense, and it was used as Hitler's wartime offices for safety, and he had everything underground that he would have needed to continue to run the war in event of major bombings. There are rooms full of maps and phones and military commanders, all trying to decide what should be done in the course of this war in response to Hitler. And then also King George VI, the man who was not supposed to be king, who was the second son, the guy with the speech impediment. He is able to rally the people. His whole family becomes a symbol of the British people. Now, Buckingham Palace is right smack dab in the middle of London. And many people suggested that the princesses Elizabeth and Margaret should be sent away to the country, like so many other London children. And the royal family decided that they would stick together, that they would stay in the heart of London, even after Buckingham Palace was hit twice by bombs. But they decided it was a really important symbol of strength to the British people, that if the British people are going to have to suffer through this, and endure this, then so will the royal family. And the king and queen would go and visit these neighborhoods. You can see how delighted these people look. They've just lost everything. Their neighborhoods have been bombed and attacked, and they're so thrilled to see the king and queen. And the king and queen are demonstrating their respect for the people, respect for the sort of can-do attitude, the refusal to give up that the Londoners especially had. Sort of a sense that they were keeping calm and carrying on. Now, this poster, many people think is from World War II, and it was to a certain degree. It became popular about 10 years ago because a huge cache or a storehouse of these posters was found, and really none of them had been put up during the war for some reason. They had just been stored. The poster that was more popular or more prevalent during the Blitz was this one. Your courage, your cheerfulness, and your resolution will bring us victory. The civilians are now the targets. They are the front lines. We saw that beginning with Guernica in 1937. In London with the Blitz, life carries on, which is just incredible that they don't give up. They don't give in to their fears, but they continue on with life as best as possible, even when these landmarks are hit, like Buckingham Palace or St. Paul's Cathedral. There was talk that maybe Parliament should be disbanded or evacuate, but they decided no, that this is what we're fighting for, the British government, the British way of life. So just as in the game, scissors beats paper, the British hold on and don't allow Hitler to win this time. Now moving on to the United States, just backtracking a little bit. From the mid-1800s on, America was still a fairly new country, but it was the age of imperialism, and they wanted to compete at the same level as the rest of the world. So starting in the mid to late 1800s, America starts trying to extend its sphere of influence. And this is when we gain control of territories like Puerto Rico and Cuba and Hawaii and the Philippines. So we're staying out of Europe, but we're trying to gain more influence, especially in the Pacific. I love this cartoon because it shows Uncle Sam trying to teach his way. We talked about the white man's burden and the imperialism unit. When America still has plenty of problems of its own before trying to teach other people how to be the best. We see a Native American who is sort of being mistreated. We see a Chinese man standing in the doorway, symbolizing all of the Chinese immigrants in America who, weren't given citizenship or equal treatment. We see a black American cleaning the windows. Even though slavery was over, black Americans still were treated as second-class citizens. Another way of looking at it is the wingspan of the eagle goes from Puerto Rico all the way to the Philippines. So America is really trying to compete on that same level as the rest of the world. And that doesn't sit well with everyone, and we'll see that in a moment. And then we talked about in the Take 5, World War I and President Wilson and this sort of isolation and neutrality. Then in the 1930s, the entire world is sunk into global depression. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR, was president of America during that time. In the 1930s, as Britain starts realizing that they might want to prepare for war, they start purchasing material from America, and they buy it with gold. Remember, this is important because during the Depression, with all this inflation, people start trading goods or looking for sources of wealth that hold their value, like gold, like commodities. So with this, Britain is benefiting. They're getting the things that they need. And also America's benefiting, and it's starting to build up our economy, allowing us to build more factories, give more Americans jobs. 1940, Britain is officially at war. Remember, they declared war on Germany September 1st, 1939. America's getting ready to continue to offer more of these products to Britain, and also keeping in mind that we may need to go to war at some point. We don't want to, but we may need to. And many historians believe that gearing up for, producing for World War II really helped get America out of the Great Depression. Through much of this, Winston Churchill has been asking for assistance from America, saying, thank you so much for for the things you have sold us, but we need more than things. We need you. We need American boots on the ground if we are going to defeat Herr Hitler. They continued to build this relationship into 1941 with the Lend-Lease Act. By this point, Britain has been preparing for a number of years, at war for now almost 2. They have run out of cash. They have run out of money with which they can buy the material. So the United States Congress passes the Lend-Lease Act that says we can lend our friends, lend our allies material, and then we'll just get it back later. Now, if you're lending another army a tank, chances are that tank won't come back to you in pristine condition if it comes back at all. We will eventually extend the Lend-Lease Act to our other allies in this war, the Soviet Union and China. So America has very clearly chosen sides, but America is not involved in the war in any other way. Then continuing to build this bond of friendship and alliance, August 1941, the Atlantic Charter is created. FDR and Churchill create this document that essentially is a list of goals for the result of the war. This is just like Wilson's 14 points. The war isn't over yet, but they are already talking about what they want to see happen at the end of it. Again, America is not at war, but they have very clearly chosen sides. This clear choice does make the Axis a little bit nervous, and the Axis is the name for Germany and her allies. So we have fascist Germany, fascist Italy, and the Empire of Japan, led by Emperor Hirohito. So like we said in the Take 5, Japan was really working on extending its power and influence in the Pacific, in Eastern Asia. That is competition for America's proposed empire. And starting in the mid-1930s, Japan had become increasingly aggressive in expanding their empire. We'll talk more about that when we talk about China in the 1930s. But Japan had been attacking China, Guam, other little areas within the Pacific, and this makes America increasingly nervous. They hope they don't have to go to war, but just in case, they start to get the Navy ready. They move it from San Diego to Honolulu, Hawaii, just in case they need to defend some of their interests in the Pacific. And this leads us to December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese attack the naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. It's a surprise attack. The declaration of war is not delivered until over an hour after the attack is finished. And this is seen as an example of Japan's ruthlessness in this war. And this is when America is pulled into the war, not because of Europe, not because of our friendship with Britain, but because Japan attacked. So we then need to defend ourselves. We declare war on Japan, and because Japan is allied with Germany and Italy, we therefore also declare war on her allies. So Pearl Harbor is really what brings America into this war. Churchill does get what he wants, and America and Britain will be fighting on multiple fronts.